Today on the OG Factory, we're hanging out with our mate Al, and we're talking about this Duramax powered Ford Falcon Ute. It's a pretty sweet car. Let's jump in.
This car is owned by Ben Paganoni, who you might remember from back in the day when Woody, I and Benny from Benny's Custom Works built his Barra-powered Mustang over in the States for Drag Week in 2019. So this car was actually the original car that was going to go to Drag Week in 2018, but it never was finished in time. It has done a Australian Drag Challenge. It was built by some people in Toowoomba that I don't remember who they are. It had a turbo LS in it with a power glide, I think. It was sort of a low 9-second car when it did run for Drag Challenge. The back end is quite a decent setup. It's got like a split monoleaf setup, which is the duck's guts of leaf spring drag racing. Big 9-inch and a pretty decent sort of cage assembly that runs through and sort of joins the whole car up. Since it had that engine in it, I think it's had like 2 other engines in it that I don't think any of them have ever sort of powered the car. They were just in there, in and out. I think it was a Barra, and then the Windsor the big Windsor that was in the black Fox body was in it for a little while. But I don't think it's ever been under power with any of those engines in it. It's had this sort of tube front end done to it at some point as well. Again, I don't know the whole timeline on it. I've only just sort of got it in the last year or so. I've been working on it for quite a while now. It's now got a Duramax, so it's a LBZ, LMM sort of aged Duramax engine in it, which is 2008 to 10 sort of thing. This engine that's in it now is a fully built motor. Basically everything but the block casting and the head castings is new. Big dollar engine. All the diesel stuff is quite expensive to play with. I don't know how far we want to go into that, but this is not for the faint-hearted. The cost of per power output is not great for a diesel. Probably the main thing with them is they make huge amounts of torque, but to get power outputs out of that torque output, you need RPM, and this engine originally would have redlined at 3200 RPM around about. So to get them to safely rev high enough to put out big power levels, you've got to either make enormous amounts of torque and not rev it very hard, or rev it harder and still maintain that torque. So it is difficult. You got to sort of build the bottom of the engine so it's happy to spin, which they just were never designed for. So this engine has been built to rev to, I think 6,000 is its maximum. It probably won't go that high, maybe 5.5. So everything's replaced, all good stuff. Fuel system wise, diesel engine, a bit different. It's obviously a common rail engine, so it is electronically controlled. The fuel system basically comes down to a lift pump that's in the back that supplies the high pressure injection pump. That's like a modified Bosch CP3 pump. They call it a 14 mil. I don't know what that means. I'm guessing it's the plunger sizes inside them or something like that. But it's supposed to be good for 1600 horsepower. The injectors are what they talk about with injectors on common rail stuff is the percentage of oversize it is. So these injectors are 250% oversized from the stock injectors, so they'll be good for around about that same sort of power level. The engine management on this is from a company that derives from Iceland. There's a guy in Australia, Chris, who distributes it. It's called a Boost Tech. With that aftermarket ECU, we can sort of basically map this thing out from scratch, just like you can with a Haltech on a petrol engine. We're actually using Haltech products on this as well because the car's basically gutted of any wiring, and I'm going to use a couple of PD16s to control the car, control all the high, like 25 amp sort of outputs that it needs, which is quite a lot. If you've ever seen the engine bay of a Silverado that has a Duramax in it, you've probably never actually seen the engine because there's so much stuff on top of them that it's you never get to see the actual core of the engine. This is quite different. Obviously, we have gone to a lot of sort of R&D effort to sort of come up with this layout on this engine. Probably the most basic off-the-shelf part of it is it's got like Banks cast exhaust manifolds on it, which are, these ones have been designed to be either facing the rear, where the original turbo sits right in the middle of the engine, or face forwards. So we've got it forward facing. It then feeds through some steam pipe, for want of a more accurate word, sort of up pipes, I suppose you'd call them, and into a Garrett G-50 turbo. So that's a G-50 1700. That's, if you're a turbo nerd, that's an 80mm inducer and a 92mm exducer on the exhaust. So it's a very large turbine, and there's reasons for that. It's probably going to be a little bit difficult to get on boost, but what we're looking for when it is on boost is a good exhaust manifold pressure to boost pressure ratio. It's very important for making power in a diesel engine, or actually any engine really, but that's a whole other topic. You might notice the wastegate's not very big. There's a reason for that. It's not really a wastegate, so to speak. It does operate the same way a wastegate does, but it's only there to reduce the exhaust manifold pressure. With this setup, we want as much boost as we can get, providing the exhaust manifold pressure isn't exceeding the boost pressure coming out of the... So we're not blocking the engine up from the exhaust perspective. So we want, if we've got 60 psi boost, we don't want more than 60 psi exhaust manifold pressure. So that there is, it's got a 60 psi spring in it. So very different from a petrol engine. So there's a lot of different philosophies that you got to sort of get your head around with diesel performance. I'm absolutely a noob at it, and it's been quite a challenge for me to sort of get my head around why things are done the way they're done. And also I expect there to be people saying that that's not right either, but as I said, I'm learning. It is a large frame turbo, so it looks massive, but it's actually the smallest one you can get in that frame. So yes, it's big, but it's not like, it just looks bigger than it is, let's say that. So it's only an 80mm inducer, which is quite small for the overall frame size. That's blowing straight into this holly top, which all this stuff here is custom made, designed by me and Danny, our mate who's a pattern maker. Obviously not the holly top, that's just a generic part, but what we've done is designed a lower manifold base for the Duramax that allows the holly pattern, which then allows you to have a lot more products like this intercooler available to you. That's doing the cooling duties. So basically we've got no piping, and there's a couple of reasons for that, and the main being there's no room. Like if you have a front mount intercooler, it's a very simple setup to have a front mount, but it takes up space, the piping takes up space, and it also would need to be a very, very big and very efficient air-to-air intercooler to cool 60 psi and upwards of boost pressure. As you make boost pressure, you make heat. There's no other way around it. Certain turbos like this one will be better at not making heat at high boost pressure, but heat is always going to be the byproduct, and you don't want it because more heat in the air means less oxygen. So obviously you got to cool that water that's going through here, which is another complexity. And in this case, I'm trying to make use of available space. I have got the radiator actually fits in the front here, outside of what used to be the radiator support panel. So it's actually a Patrol radiator because it fit in the space, and I know that they work fine cooling these engines because we've done Duramax powered Patrols before. So that space is taken up by the radiator and some fans, and the intercooler radiator, which also needs to be very big, is in the tray. So yeah, trying to distribute the weight and the sort of make use of the available space, I've put obviously a fuel tank. This area here used to be a fuel tank. It's a very small tank. It's only a 20 litre Raceworks fuel tank. There isn't two fuel tanks. That other tank there is actually a water tank for the water to air intercooler, so a reservoir. The reason there's only a small fuel tank is the less weight when it's racing, the better. It's weight is the enemy of elapsed times. You got to shift it, and yes, a diesel was made to shift weight, but it still doesn't matter. You still, the less weight the better when you're trying to race. There's that pump that supplies the fuel to the high pressure pump up the front. That's an air dog. It's like the biggest one they make. There's not much else to the fuel system on a diesel, even though it's common rail. It's basically just make sure it can get enough fuel, and it'll do its job up front. This is the radiator for the water to air intercooler. You can see it's massive. It's actually a Jeep radiator, which fit perfectly in this application. I just welded a few tabs on the roll cage here. There's a nitrous bottle there. Diesels love nitrous, and it will definitely be required. You can use nitrous as, well, right the way through, just like any other engine, but we mainly would use it to clean up the mixtures prior to get the turbo to come on boost faster. So we got the options there. Obviously you can add more nitrous later, but for a start we'll just try and figure out how to make the thing run properly in the first place, which is quite the challenge. So there's a lot of custom made parts under here. Obviously they don't make some fit Duramaxes into Ford Utes. So I've called on my friend Matt Tomasini, who is a master at making custom made things for me, and he knocked me up a sump from sheet aluminium. Got a steering rack going through the middle of it here, so we've got like a couple of wells, the main well here and then a little one at the back, and they are joined by a balance tube, which is not on there yet, obviously. The engine and gearbox was actually mounted originally by Matt Rogan from Rogan Industries, who you all know, and we've engine plated the engine, which basically means we've got this plate here that runs across through the bell housing, picks up all the bell housing bolts, and then has tabs welded onto the chassis. And on the front, Matt's done a chromoly tubular sort of setup to hold it. This is by far the most secure way of holding an engine that makes big power and torque into the car. Behind that, we've got a Hughes built lock-up Turbo 400. So this is like as serious as it gets for a automatic transmission. It's a 3-speed still. You can get two-speed versions of them for different applications, but we need the ratios because we don't have RPM. So this is basically, you would refer it to as a Pro Mod gearbox. So this is one of the things that you have to deal with when you're playing with diesels is this engine's probably going to make 12 to 1500 horsepower. Oh yeah, no big deal, that's not much. The thing is, it's going to make the torque of a 3,500 horsepower engine, petrol engine, because it doesn't rev. So the gearbox doesn't care about the horsepower, it cares about the torque loading. So you need a gearbox that's built for a 3,500 horsepower petrol engine to handle that. If you're thinking, you're probably going, why don't you use the Allison 1000 transmission that is normally bolted behind this? And yes, that is built to handle torque loads, and it probably could handle the torque that this engine would make, but it won't shift. Like, they're not built to shift fast, so you're stuck. You end up having to spend big money on a box like this. The other option is a 4L80 or 85E, which do come behind these engines in a derated format, like an Astro Express van sort of thing. A lot of people do use them, but probably more for a budget reasons. Like they're far cheaper to put together, and I mean they'd be probably a third of the price of this gearbox. But they do break a lot. They're not made to handle that sort of torque, so you do end up sort of feeding gearboxes in or replacing parts inside the box a lot, which is fine if you're sort of geared up for that. But we want to try and put this together so it just works, and normal service will keep it going. The converter is a very fancy unit. I think this is, it's obviously came with the transmission from Hughes, but it's the front half of it is from Suncoast, which is a diesel automatic specialist in Florida, I think. So that's a proper lock-up converter, so we can lock this up under power. People talk about lock-up transmissions, like a 4L80E is obviously a lock-up converter, but you can't lock it up under power in most cases unless the power is not very high, because it just will not handle it. Even with this sort of thing that can handle that, you have to be incredibly careful about your strategy to lock it up, because if you lock it up at the wrong time, you'll either blow the converter to bits or blow the auto to bits, or both. So it's very, you got to be very careful about the way you use that function, because it is only to be used under certain like loadings. So again, that's another thing that we'll have to learn, or you know, employ someone to help us with, because I know anecdotally that that's going to happen, but I don't know specifics about what those levels are or anything like that. So lots to learn. There's the 9-inch at the back there. It's a 3.5 ratio currently. It is a big pinion diff, so it's been put together really well. The ratio is not very practical for this engine because it won't rev, but for the 1/8 mile it's probably going to be okay. But for a 1/4 mile car, we'll probably need to change it to something like a 2.9 or 2.5, something like that, and utilize the torque to get the speeds. So unfortunately it's very hard to get a ratio like of that in that big pinion 9.5-inch like torque, like what can handle the torque loading. It's very hard to get that ratio, so I'm still looking around. I've got a couple of smaller pinion 2.5 and 2.75 gear sets that we can try and see if they'll last, but I suspect they probably won't. So lots more to do. We just have to finish building it and then find out. So that's pretty much what I've been up to for the last 9 months or whatever it's been since I've sort of left the skid factory helm. Everything is quite time consuming, so I haven't got much to show for myself. I've built a couple of other cars, a little Mazda Ute with a 4AG turbo engine in it, which I've just sort of finished. Like, they're never finished, but so that's on the road now. I've got the Fairlane in here for its annual like add-on or update or whatever you want to call it. The other thing I've got back just in the last week is the Z, which wasn't really finished when we left off. It was just sort of had its dyno tune done, and that was it. It's never been on the road. I've just got it back from being painted. So my friend Shane did the paint job on it. It's full respray, all the bumper bars and everything done on it, and it was actually quite a big job because it is an aging Japanese sports car. So it's now I've got it back, we can address a few little things that are wrong with it. Some poor decisions made regarding clutch choices and such, and just try and sort of patch it all back together and finish it up, get the aircon working and that sort of thing. So that'll be fun. It looks great in its new black pearl paint, so keen on that. It's nice to have a nice looking car. Just got nowhere to put it. That's not nice, but you get that. So thanks for watching. I'm still here, and we'll see you next time.
We'll be back next time with Kevo. We're ready to hit the dyno this week, and fingers crossed everything goes to plan. Shout out to Oliver Go, Keith Haish, Mark Burns, Peter Zenos, and Ross Dalton for supporting the Skid Factory via Patreon. Check out the merch store for some fresh merch. What's for dinner? Let's have a palmy.
And no, I don't do this shit anymore.
Yeah.
Where's my script? Passion not loading. What? Just making you hold that thing. It's got and it's So